Welcome to the Real Integrative Medicine Podcast. I'm Dr. Jordan Robertson, and I'm here to bring you the tools, insights, and strategies to take your health to the next level while using evidence-based integrative medicine. What's real? This is what we want to explore together. Research is ever-changing and not easy to interpret. We're bringing you the best that integrative medicine has to offer while sticking to the facts. Our mission is to elevate the practice of integrative medicine for clinicians and patients alike. Preventative solutions, nutrition, exercise, and sometimes supplements have a seat at the table in medicine, but only if we uncover real science-backed solutions. It's time to uncover what works and challenge what doesn't. Let's unlock your full health potential with an integrated approach. Ready to learn what's real? Let's dive in. Hey there, welcome to another episode of the Real Integrative Medicine Podcast. I'm excited about this discussion. I love talking about skin. I feel like it brings up so much stuff. Personally, I feel like I have this massive authority over this topic because I have struggled with adult acne and rosacea, and I have celiac. And so I'm just going to mush all of this conversation together, and we're going to talk about the impact of food on skin. But it brings up a lot of things in the integrative medicine space when we start to talk about any kind of aesthetic conversation. There's definitely a morality around having good, clear skin. And I think that this is a time where integrative medicine, or I'll call it wellness influencers or the wellness space, can really do a lot of damage with the information that they share online about how to have clear skin and what's responsible for affecting your skin. And I've always found that really frustrating because when we talk about, whose fault is it when you have acne, we're often making it sound and feel like it's the patient's fault. If only you just ate better, or if only you did this differently, you wouldn't have acne. When the vast majority of what we talk about with respect to breakouts, whether that's acne or rosacea related, are actually genetic in nature. And I would love for us to shift that conversation away from blame towards something that has more compassion, like we're seeing in the conversations around obesity medicine and other places where we're acknowledging very well that there is a genetic basis to baseline set points in many health conditions. And then yet with acne, it's kind of well, you must not eat clean enough. That's why you have acne. I hate that. I hate that conversation. And I like this topic because I think it does a better job of normalizing how we need to think about treatment for skin conditions, and especially in adulthood, and how to normalize whether we're talking cure or management, which is a really important distinction between, for how we're thinking about supporting patients who have chronic skin conditions. The term cure makes it sound like if you just do this thing, then it goes away, and then we're never going to have to discuss it ever again, right? We cure you from your strep throat, and although you may get strep throat again in the future, this idea is that, you take the medication that supports, getting rid of your strep throat, and you are cured from your strep throat. The discussion around adult skin conditions is very different. We are talking about the term management because that genetic tendency or underlying risk is probably always going to be there. Sometimes we'll see when people have big hormonal shifts or transition into menopause and maybe lose all of their testosterone, that we do see this quote unquote cure, or your life has changed enough or your body has changed enough that this is no longer a really topical concern for you. But for the most part, we're talking about management, which is how do we decrease flare-ups? How do we improve healing time when you do have a flare-up? That's what we're discussing when we're talking about adult acne and rosacea. It's management. It's not cure. And again, so much of that discussion online makes it sound like all you have to do are these two magical things, and you put this special cream on and you will be cured. Again, that's shifting blame to the patient, that if they don't get cured from all of these, apparently miraculous solutions online, then there's something wrong with them, where we really need to shift the conversation to use the word management. And I've talked about this before on the podcast, and honestly, this might be the topic that I've received the most personal messages from people saying Thank you very much for acknowledging, like, I feel like I've been fighting a battle against my skin my entire life. And everyone made it sound like I should just be able to find this, magical combination or secret potion that was going to cure me forever, when cure is the wrong word, right? The right word is management. But I think, the discussion around nutrition and skin is attractive, in the wellness culture space. Again, because we've put so much like morality around clean eating, and because there is this we put good skin on a pedestal. Those things get connected, right, in the online space, where if you, ate this special wellness girly diet, you can have beautiful, clear skin. And so the discussion around nutrition and the online space for acne and rosacea is really prolific, meaning that we put out a ton of stuff on nutrition and skin. The question is it real, right? Like, is the association between those things real? That's what we're going to kind of focus on today. So one piece of information that we don't really have yet, but I would love to see, is the impact of these very low nutrient diets on skin. I will make this ongoing joke of that. I'd like to see the skin of the people on the carnivore diet 15 years from now. We don't quite have that level of data at this point to say how some of these extreme low nutrient, meaning like no fruits and vegetables, no fiber, very low vitamins, antioxidants, etc., diets are going to have on skin. I want that literature. I think that will be fascinating when we see what happens there. What we know at this moment is that people have generally less risk of skin conditions and better skin when they eat closer to a Mediterranean diet. And I know that the carnivore advocates are going to be like, well, we've never studied it. And that's why, right around the corner is this study how if you only eat steak, your skin also is amazing. I highly doubt that. I mean, I'm totally willing to have my mind changed and be proven wrong at some point in time if that research ever becomes available. But what we know right now about the nutrients required for good skin health, the impact of things like, anovulatory cycles, etc., on skin health, I am highly doubtful that eating steak only is improving your skin. And if anything, my guess is that there is a rapid aging in skin in these antioxidant deficient diets. We just don't have that information quite yet. And so maybe one day I'll have more to say about that. But what I did want to talk about is are there offending foods with respect to skin health? And what do we know about that right now? And do you need to eliminate any foods for your skin? Because again, this is often the conversation we see online is about decreasing the kinds of foods you're eating with this goal of improving your skin. And often we label foods as inflammatory or they're going to disrupt your hormones. And that becomes the basis for why we take foods out for acne or rosacea. The question is that real, right? Or do we really have research or data on that? So I do want to go through kind of each of the food groups that have been talked about with respect to acne and rosacea, and then I'll share what the actual literature says about them, and then you can make some decisions for yourself whether you're willing to give up cheese and chocolate, not to be a spoiler. So before we jump in there, I do just want to make a quick comment about acne and rosacea. They're very different, right? They're very different etiology. They affect slightly different populations, and the treatments actually are wildly different conventionally, or they should be. Let's just say that. The treatment should be different. There are some drugs that overlap and support both, but in general, we're looking at two very distinct situations. The challenge is that we often misdiagnose either of them as the other in adult populations, right? We will, brush off adult acne and maybe call it rosacea because we kind of assume that hormonally driven acne lesions should quote unquote, we should grow out of it, right? And so if you're in your 40s and you still have really significant cystic acne, we might start to wonder if it's something else. And rosacea is also difficult to diagnose because the papular symptoms, like the actual papules of rosacea, can look an awful lot like acne where we need to see that differentiation is some of the flushing and underlying redness that happens with rosacea. Huge challenge in patients who have darker skin tones, where we may be calling them, acne patients their whole life, but actually they have rosacea. It's just that the redness of their skin is not as obvious as it might be in a fairer patient. So I did want to call that out. So as you're listening, and if you're like, I've tried all these things, or this feels frustrating, then certainly it warrants a conversation whether or not we've got you on the right side of that sort of diagnostic framework. If we misdiagnose you, we mistreat you, right? So that's the other piece, that if you feel like you've tried all the things and nothing is improving it, then we certainly need to ask ourselves the question, have we labeled it correctly? Or do we need to start back at the beginning and maybe consider that this is something else? The other piece to call out here, though, about both rosacea and acne, is that some of the treatments that we use to support these conditions benefit from nutrition for totally different reasons than the skin clearing benefit of nutrition. So some of the top shelf medications we have for both acne and rosacea include things like Accutane, or maybe for acne, we might consider the birth control pill. Many of these drugs, if that's the best option for you, actually have some metabolic side effects, right? So patients who are on Accutane do see changes in their triglycerides and some of their metabolic health parameters. You can use nutrition, and there's evidence to support patients with nutrition while they're pursuing conventional treatment for their acne and their rosacea. So if you're taking medication, don't throw out the idea that nutrition can help. Nutrition can help. And nutrition can help some of the side effects that are associated with those medications. And so I'm not going to talk about that today. That's a really important conversation. Today, I wanted to focus on the specific foods that do seem to help support clearness in the skin. But I do want to call out that there are other metabolic things to consider here. We also know in patients with PCOS that if we improve their metabolic health, right? If we improve their insulin resistance, if we improve their free androgen index, then we may see some improvement in their acne. It's not like a shoe-in, and we often get frustrated when testosterone levels improve on blood work, but then we don't see an improvement in the skin. But there is a wider metabolic conversation to have there in patients who have PCOS. But we're going to park that. That's not really the focus of the conversation today. I do want to focus on sort of these offending foods and whether or not you need to take them out of your diet completely. It's funny, the rosacea conversation is actually a bit short. So there's definitely a discussion about elimination diets, taking specific foods away in rosacea patients in the integrative medicine space. There's not a lot of research to support that. So we've looked at foods and foods that seem to trigger rosacea. It seems to be much more correlated to foods triggering flushing and redness in patients who have that susceptibility. So patients may know that a cup of coffee or spicy foods may really flare up their skin or give that tingling, itchy redness experience to their rosacea. So funny, there's a really great recent study where they actually polled patients to find out which foods were super triggering for them. And they made this big long list, and it's all the things that we've maybe talked about for decades, like spicy foods, caffeine, alcohol, etc. And then they followed those patients over the course of a couple of weeks, and they did not avoid any of them. So it's interesting that perhaps the conversation with rosacea and nutrition is okay, well, we know, right? It reminds me of those lactose intolerance memes where it's I have lactose intolerance, but I'm not going to not eat my grilled cheese. It seems that with rosacea, we're mostly talking about foods that kind of offend by causing more flushing and redness, but we're maybe not avoiding those foods as a group if we know that they impact it. So I think that's kind of funny and fascinating. And maybe that's because of the sort of temporary nature of those flare-ups that if I had a cup of coffee and it made my rosacea redder and then it went away, I'm pretty sure I would keep eating or drinking my coffee. And maybe that's a reflection of that.
Do you know what I was dying for when I was a practicing clinician? I wanted someone to summarize the latest research, tie it up with a nice little bow, and deliver it to my inbox every single month. I'm Dr. Jordan Robertson. I'm the host of the Real Integrative Medicine podcast, and this episode is brought to you by my free integrative medicine magazine called The Stacks. We're all dying for unbiased, unindustry-funded information to help us be the best in practice. The Stacks delivers you quality articles every single month on the latest research on things you care about in practice, as well as opinion articles and business advice for integrative practitioners and naturopathic doctors. You can subscribe to the Stacks with the link in the show notes today and get access immediately to all of our back issues that show you exactly how to be an evidence-based practitioner. I hope you sign up and you'll enjoy it.
There are some studies looking at trying to prevent rosacea in different populations. Like I said earlier, the Mediterranean diet scores and having a healthier pattern of nutrition is the strongest preventative measure when it comes to nutrition and rosacea. We seem to think that patients who, I'm going to say eat healthier in air quotes, but closer to that Mediterranean diet score, they're the people who have the least risk of rosacea. And we've not yet been able to identify particular foods that seem to increase your risk of rosacea or worsen your rosacea, maybe aside from those like foods that patients already say that bother their rosacea, right? So my recommendation there, if you have rosacea and you know that foods bother you, I mean, you're an adult, you can make a decision if you want to avoid the spices in your burrito. But at this point, we don't have a lot of evidence that there's a specific food you should take out or that avoiding spicy food makes your rosacea get any better. You're just maybe not going to have some of the flushing that you might have if you do have those foods. Acne is a slightly different story, and I'll say the faster of the two discussion points is on chocolate. And we've studied chocolate in a couple of different ways. It's like, it's so funny. We always ask such good questions when we don't want something to be true. Right? If we want something to be true and we hear that it's true, we're like, yeah, amazing, sounds good. And we just take it at face value. If we don't want something to be true and it seems like it might be true, this is where we put our like major detective hats on, and all of a sudden everyone is an expert at critical appraisal. And they're like, yeah, but is it the dairy in the chocolate? What about dark chocolate? Yeah, but is it the sugar in the chocolate? Like, what about dark chocolate? Yeah, but is it, right? Like, this is how we approach this when we start to talk about chocolate. And the funny thing is that we've actually studied it, and albeit the studies are small and there's often only one of them looking at chocolate in any particular form. However, the body of literature is definitely towards chocolate being a concern. And it actually doesn't matter how you take it in, even chocolate or cocoa in capsules. So we've removed all the other food components of the chocolate. It's not the dairy, it's not the sugar, it's just the chocolate in a capsule. If you take chocolate in a capsule, it worsens your acne. And so no matter how we look at this challenge, we definitely see a worsening of the chocolate. And we've tried studies where we give people jelly beans to compare the sugar, where we give people butter and apricots to try and match the calories, right? Because we always have to question, is it the food itself? Is it what the food does to total caloric intake? Does the food influence other patterns of behavior, right? Is it the chocolate, or is it the fact that it's Christmas vacation and we're all overeating and over drinking, right? We have to try and isolate all of those pieces when we're studying nutrition, which is what makes nutrition research so hard and so fascinating. But even in the studies where we calorie match, sugar match, blind the patients, put the chocolate in a capsule, whether it's men, whether it's women, it doesn't matter. The chocolate worsens your acne. And it's funny, I definitely will notice, the week or so after Halloween or after Christmas, I'm always like, this is so unfair that I'm so broken out, when it's maybe the only time of the year that I have consistent chocolate eating for 3 or 4 days. And truly that's all it takes. In some of the studies, they gave like one dose of chocolate and it was worsening their acne. Like, this is the worst news ever. But funnily that we interestingly, like, we always want to pick holes in the things that we really don't want to be true. And the interesting thing, and so the take home here, is that the effect on acne actually seems to be pretty rapid. So in most of the studies, they're seeing worsening of their acne in days. So what this means is that you probably don't have to take chocolate out for 2 years to see if it helps your acne. My guess is if you take it out and you let your skin calm down and then you trial with acne, that might teach you quite a bit as to whether or not you are a chocolate acne connection person. But you don't have to be off of it for a super long time in order to see the difference. Most studies on chocolate and acne are like less than 6 weeks long. So if anything, we're within 6 weeks of understanding if your life has been ruined by this information or if you can carry on having chocolate as you were. The dairy conversation is so much more complicated. And it's funny, I presented on this topic a couple of years ago inside the Confident Clinician program. And at the time, the best we could ascertain was that there might be a link with dairy and acne. It's curious whether it's about total caloric intake, meaning that sometimes when we study dairy is such a complicated food. It's calories, it's protein, it's saturated fat, right? It pushes on some of our anabolic processes in our body, which we love in the context of whey protein, but maybe we hate in the context of acne. There's a lot going on when we study dairy, and often we have not picked it apart enough to know what the real problem is. And we are seeing in other areas where we were just kind of globally saying that dairy was a problem, dairy that contributes negatively to caloric intake, meaning that it pushes people over their ideal caloric intake, seems to be negative sort of across the board. Dairy that improves caloric intake, meaning that patients are at a eucaloric diet or hypocaloric, if that's the benefit or the goal for that particular population, dairy seems to be positive, right? Like if we feed people high protein whey or high protein yogurt, right? Like a Greek yogurt, often their total caloric intake goes down. And so the dairy has had a positive impact on their diet in totality. And when we add in other forms of dairy, like cheese, we often are going over calorically. And so then is it the cheese? Is it the calories? So hard to tease apart. But a couple of years ago, the dairy conversation was there's a connection. But we definitely saw in a few meta-analyses where we started to stratify the dairy by saturated fat intake, as that maybe it was a more complicated to answer, and that perhaps low-fat dairy was not as big of a deal because people are eating less of it when they eat low-fat dairy and their total caloric intake has gone down a bit. So at that time, we thought that people could probably consume maybe 6 to 12 servings of dairy per week before it really became a problem for their acne. And that's kind of where we had left it. We wanted clinicians to be able to make this complicated decision with their patients about dairy. If patients knew that it was absolutely a problem, fine, let's take it out. But dairy has so many health benefits for insulin resistance and weight management and bone health that shouldn't be a thing we jump to eliminate, especially in patients over 40. So we wanted people to be able to make this more complicated decision about dairy and acne at that time. Since then, right, we've published a few more assessments, meta-analyses, and reviews that have collected a lot of the data on dairy and acne. And we definitely do see some higher risk of acne in patients who have at least one serving of dairy per day. And we also see continued, right, studies that have been published in the last 2 or 3 years that there is an association between dairy intake and acne, and it starts at around 3 servings per week, which is disappointing. I feel like this episode is bad news bears for people who enjoy chocolate and dairy. So it's interesting, right? The body of literature is still moving in that direction that we think dairy is a problem. The curiosity is that we don't know why, right? Is it the whey protein, which this has always been what we pointed our finger at, because one time 5 bodybuilders took whey protein and had their acne worsen. And then we've literally based, thousands of recommendations based off of this one study. Is it the whey? Is it that it's affecting total caloric intake in patients who already, maybe are over on their calories or have insulin resistance, and that this is going to worsen their entire health and metabolic picture to have dairy? Or is there something special about dairy that seems to worsen acne in certain patients? We don't know. But the good thing is that most of the trials, again, are actually pretty short. So I've seen patients where they've been on a dairy-free diet for 2 years and their acne is exactly the same. We should see a difference within 6 to 12 weeks. Most research studies or observational studies that look at removing dairy, they actually are quite short. And so if we haven't seen a tremendous change, or if the change you see doesn't outweigh the risks of taking dairy out, then certainly begs the question whether or not we should just leave it in your diet and look at other strategies to support your skin. So that's just to summarize that. And I know we like clear-cut answers. And one of the benefits of podcast is that we get to talk about things a little bit longer, right? Like there's no way in a 90-second reel on Instagram am I able to dive into these topics at this level of depth and to try and give you this level of understanding. And when we say things like dairy and acne, it's complicated, it does not really, it doesn't really give you an avenue to like dive deeper and understand this much more clearly. But all nutrition is kind of like that same discussion where if people eat dairy, they're not eating something else. If people eat dairy, does that mean that they're now eating too much or too little? Did it change the way that they're eating? Is it the food itself, right? Or what the food does to the rest of your diet? It's a very complicated discussion when we look at specific foods and their impact on any health outcome. So the take home here with both the dairy and the chocolate is that the research is still going like this, where we see a connection between acne incidence, acne worsening, and acne improvement if we get rid of them. So like that's like the trifecta, right, of us trying to understand some kind of causation is when we're looking at, does it work on all of these fronts? And at this point with these two foods, it does seem that that's the case. The why is curious, and that always makes us uncomfortable, right? When we don't know why something works, it makes us feel unconfident, unfortunately, even though there's so many things in medicine that we don't know how it works. But especially when it's things that we don't want to be true, as soon as there's like a whisper of us not being super clear on how something works, we're like, that can't be true, even though the research is actually really pointing in that direction. The last thing I wanted to sort of comment on was gluten. There's no evidence for a gluten-free diet improving acne. There is like a little bit of discussion of gluten with hidradenitis suppurativa. I stumble over that every time, no matter how many times I've said it. And there's actually some updated literature about that particular skin condition, which sometimes that gets lumped in with acne as if they're going to respond the same way. But there was a little bit of discussion about gluten for that condition. But where it does come up is with rosacea because of the overlap between rosacea and celiac. So we're still of the mindset that if you have not tested positive for celiac, you probably don't need to eliminate gluten for the sake of it. If you feel better, you do you. I'm just saying that taking it out for no reason is not really warranted at this point. There isn't literature that it's inflammatory and that it's inflaming your skin and that you need to take it out for any reason. And then the last food I did want to comment on, which I'm disappointed that we don't know the answer to this, is alcohol. So I mean, I have a total bias around the alcohol discussion. And I always think when I'm searching that I'm going to like find, that alcohol just worsens everything. That's totally my bias. We don't know that in this moment, that acne or rosacea seem to respond better or worse to alcohol intake. And quite often when we're looking at it, we see this like bi-directional relationship where people who have acne and rosacea may drink more, but it has nothing to do with, like, it's not impacting their skin. Maybe there's a mental health component there, right? Where we're seeking that solution more often when patients are struggling with a chronic health condition, which is often the case. But we don't have any evidence in this moment that taking alcohol out improves your acne or your rosacea. And so for what it's worth, I just wanted to make sure that we covered that. So today, what I want you to take away from the conversation is that, one, we're talking management, not cure, right? And again, I've talked about this before on the podcast, but the language to me really matters when we're talking about chronic health conditions, especially in the online space. When you drop that C word and people don't get a cure, you are inadvertently blaming them for the persistence of their symptoms, and they might be genetic. The moment we acknowledge that something's genetic, we develop so much compassion for people. So we probably need to do that in the acne discussion as an entire group. I also want you to know that there are some specific food patterns that do seem to reduce the risk of acne and rosacea, and that includes fruits and vegetables, like the Mediterranean diet. So, help us for the people that are eating no fruits and vegetables, and I'd like to see their skin in the next 20 years. I have no research that says eating the carnivore diet worsens your skin, but I'm going to bet like my entire house on that. But there are some specific foods that do seem in a short period of time to worsen your acne. And so give it 6 to 12 weeks of a dairy-free, chocolate-free, and the chocolate has to be like those studies where it was giving it in a capsule is like parts per million. Like you need to avoid that like the plague, but not for very long, right? For us to see the impact. And so again, those specific foods, the research is trending towards it being offending. But you don't need to do a dairy-free diet for 2 years for us to figure that out. We're probably talking on the better side of 6 to 12 weeks. And then all the other foods that you've heard, right, that are inflammatory, that are bad, there's no evidence for that, right? I called out the two unfortunate foods that are a big deal. But the rest of the foods, there are no specific foods that we can target that are worsening your skin. The overall pattern needs to probably be healthier for all of us. I need to eat more fruits and vegetables. And so that's what I want that focus to be, is that a well-rounded Mediterranean style diet, acknowledging that we at this moment think that there are two big offending food groups that in some patients, if we reduce them, we do expect to see improvement. All right, that's it for this week. I look forward to seeing you next week, where we continue to tackle what's real and what's total BS in the health and wellness space. I can't wait to see you next week. That's it for today's episode of the Real Integrative Medicine Podcast. I hope you're feeling inspired, informed, and ready to make changes that truly support your health. If you found value in today's discussion, don't forget to hit subscribe, share this episode with someone who needs it, and leave a review. It helps us reach even more listeners just like you. Your health journey is personal and it's powerful. Let's keep building on the knowledge to give you the confidence you need to thrive. It's important to remember that the Real Integrative Medicine Podcast is for educational purposes only. Be sure to talk to your doctor before making any personal health changes. This podcast isn't intended to diagnose you, and no doctor-patient relationship was formed by listening. We'll see you next week.